Hello, fictional. Welcome to the What If Issei. Today we are gonna see, what if Darth Vader became a mentor to a Force-sensitive Issei? Part 3. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Near Kuo Town, Japan, 2012 AD, 16 ABY, Issei stood behind his master, who himself was seated at a conference table. The table had been stolen from one of the better-off meeting rooms above, and all traces of grime or filth had been cleaned. In the table's center, a highly stylized version of the Imperial crest was burned. Each color of the crest symbolized a part of the Imperial remnants under Vader. The blue and white were for the 501st Legion, the black was for Vader himself, and the gray was for the men, women, and droids who were the Navy, Army, and other personnel from the Executor, as well as his former home on Mustafar. Riaz and Sona sat in chairs opposite one another and to either side of his master. Their peerages stood behind them as well, save for their queens. The chairs the three leaders sat on were also scavenged from the less damaged rooms. The reason why they'd moved here was to move out of the way of the men and women currently at work doing regular maintenance. I believe we're due some explanations, Lord Vader, Sona began as she looked up slightly. Issei couldn't blame her considering how tall his master was. Vader nodded, his hands coming off the edge of the table and onto his chair's armrests. Yes. I suppose I do owe you that much since I had two of your subordinates kidnapped to bring you both here. Where would you have me begin? I can't believe I'm about to ask this, but here goes. Are you and your men from Earth? No, we are not. My men and I come from all across the galaxy, though my apprentice is from Earth. The reason as to why we came here is simple. We're refugees. We were all members of an empire that controlled the entire galaxy for the past 20 years. That all changed 12 years ago when I slew the emperor of that empire. Riaz spoke up then, shock in her and Akeno's features. You killed your own emperor. Why? He was attempting to kill my son. That, and he had made me a slave for his entire reign. Before that empire, the Galactic Empire, was born, it had originally been the Galactic Republic. The Emperor was once the Chancellor of that republic, but he fooled us all. He orchestrated a war that would give him control over the entire galaxy in the span of 3 years. In the final year of that war, he convinced me he could save my wife if I did his bidding. I betrayed everyone and everything I ever knew at that point so that I could save her. Did you? Save her, I mean. Sona asked this time as a grimace appeared on her face. No. In the end, I was the one who brought about her death. The Emperor had twisted my mind to the point that I thought she betrayed me. I killed her in a fit of rage. I've been paying for my actions that day ever since. After I killed her, I fought in a duel and lost. My consequence was being trapped in this suit for the rest of my days. It keeps me alive, yes, but it also keeps me in constant misery. It is a fate befitting one such as I. You can't be fully blamed for what happened to your wife. You were tricked into doing it. Perhaps, but I am still the one who killed her. I was the one who crushed her throat. My children survived despite my efforts, obviously. Had they not, I imagine I would still be the Emperor's slave. You mentioned earlier that this Emperor was trying to kill your son. Why? Because my son had chosen to become a Jedi. Jedi were champions of peace and justice, the antithesis of an empire built on systemic injustice. The Emperor and I were part of a group that opposed the Jedi, the Order of the Sith Lords. I had tried to turn my son to our side before the Emperor attempted to kill him. I wanted his help to overthrow the man that had caused our family so much pain and take over the Galactic Empire. Instead, he brought me out of the darkness that had taken hold of me. And your men, they know this. They agree with what you did to their emperor. Akeno questioned this time with a soft gaze. I told them everything over 10 years ago. The truth about the empire, about the emperor and I, and what the emperor had done. From there, Issei listened on as each question the heiresses had was answered by his master. They were surprisingly nice to Vader after what he told them. It seemed strange. Issei himself had begrudgingly understood why his master did what he did. After a while though, that understanding turned to pity for his master. The man's life seemed like one big tragedy when one looked at it from an outsider's perspective. After they'd exhausted their questions, Vader had begun his own. His master asked them about everything Raynor had told him. From sacred gears to the basic level of understanding of how each biblical faction worked, they answered as best they could. Once that was finished, Vader told them about the prophecy given to him years ago. The return of his Sith master and what he would do to Earth. His master even went so far as to tell them that the fallen in Kuo Town had been corrupted by one of his former master's agents already. The heiresses didn't believe it at first. Why would they? Vader had no proof of his claims. That was until Raynor was led into the conference room. The fallen recoiled at the sight of the Kuo Town devil leaders and she immediately tried to bolt out of the room. A single order from Vader kept her there, however. The devils collectively gasped at her new appearance. After Vader had uncorrupted Raynor, remnants of that corruption appeared as she recovered from their duel. Her right eye was permanently scarred into a Sith yellow coloration, her skin was far paler, and a portion of her hair had gone completely white. The skills her dark self had used against his master were still there, and her strength had also increased greatly. She was able to lift a pair of speeder bikes with one hand each, both weighing about 400 pounds. Vader surmised that her strength was due to how hard her dark self was pushing to break free of his force grip. As you can see, I am telling the truth. Your bishops in particular can attest to this, Arasitri, as they watched her duel with Issei. Vader remarked as Raynor went to stand behind Vader. If this former master of yours is returning, how are you to stop him? You can't seriously think you can do it alone? Sona asked incredulously after getting a nod from her two bishops. Vader shook his head before replying. I have been told as such by the Force itself. It has, in point of fact, tasked me with finding allies. That was the reason behind my vision of Kuo Academy, it seems. Getting into contact with both of you. Why us? Rhea's questioned pointedly, one eyebrow raising as she folded her arms. Vader was silent for a long minute until he leaned back in his chair and answered. That I do not know. Perhaps in time, that answer will be revealed. My only question now is thus. Will we forge an agreement to end my former master when he returns, or shall we go our separate ways? I will not force this fight on those who do not wish to fight it. The heiresses mulled over his master's words for a long time. Issei could feel that they were conflicted about what Vader had told them. He wasn't all that surprised by this. After all, when Vader had told him about the prophecy, he didn't want to believe it. He was just some kid from Earth. Why did he have to be the one to destroy the returning evil space wizard? He had a life of his own, damn it. Issei realized now that he was the only one who could stand up to Palpatine besides Vader and his men. If what Vader had told him all those years ago was true, he was the only one on Earth who could use the Force. That's also not to mention the fact that Earth and its solar system were far removed from any contact with the wider galaxy. It was practically impossible for anyone from the wider galaxy to help them. When the devils turned back around, he had a suspicion they wouldn't be joining forces when Sona began to speak. Look, Lord Vader, while we can appreciate the dire threat of Palpatine's return, we simply have other more pressing problems. We are still technically at war with the Fallen and the Angels. Once the war is over we could join forces. For now, though, we simply can't fully commit to it. That doesn't mean we can't be allies. What do you propose? Vader asked as he steepled his fingers. Rhea's answered with a confident smile. A partnership. Think of it as a way to build trust between us. You're telling us about you, the prophecy, and the corrupted Fallen is a start, don't get me wrong, but that only grants you so much trust. We only just met you after all. It would be foolish to completely trust you over the span of one conversation. And what would be the terms of this partnership? In exchange for your help dealing with any stray devils that appear here in Kuo Town and information you can provide on the corrupted Fallen, you will be provided with resources from Grimory Large Enterprises. It'll most likely be money. I'm not entirely sure what you'd be able to do with travel agencies, hotels, or the film industry. I'm sure Sona can also have the Shitori Medical Group provide you with discreet medical facilities, should the need ever arise. Of course, though I'd also like to ask you about medical technology or practices you brought with you. I'm sure you have medical personnel already. Yes. I am unsure, however, how much you will be able to replicate here. Earth hasn't reached our level of technology yet. I'm sure magic can solve that problem. Are we all in agreement to create a partnership between ourselves? You already know what I would decide, Sona, Rhea said with a smirk, so what do you think of the partnership idea, Lord Vader? Trust is a long process, and the only way to truly begin earning one another's trust is by understanding who we are dealing with. To that end, I agree to the partnership. The two devil heiresses and Issei's master stood and shook hands. Vader then allowed them to leave, as Issei no doubt guessed his master sensed his unease. Raynor took one of the open seats and stretched before placing her new boots on the table. You believe telling the devils of my past was a mistake, my apprentice? Vader commented dryly as he sat back down. Issei frowned before he answered. To put it frankly, master, yes. Can we really risk the possibility of making enemies before we are ready? There's no way you could have known how Sona and Rhea's would have taken your past. On the contrary, young Heim, I already knew how they would take it. Do not forget that the Force allows us to see into the thoughts and feelings of others. I knew both girls were quite compassionate. It was highly unlikely that either would resent me for my part as a manipulated and used pawn. You yourself have mentioned we shouldn't rely solely on the Force. Yes, I have. Speaking to them was also what made me honest. The way they conducted themselves and how they treated their servants, particularly in Grimory's case, is what ultimately led to my decision. Seeing as how it worked, I'm inclined to agree with your judgment. In the future, though, could you at least consider keeping some of your cards close to your chest, please? It would mean a lot less stress on me if you did. I will consider it. Now, we must turn to other matters. Raynor. Vader dismissed while turning to the fallen angel. Said fallen angel instantly got her feet off the table and sat up straight. Yes, Lord Vader. Were you able to disguise your new appearance? Yes. It was fairly easy to look like my old self given enough concentration. I'm a little worried though. If the others somehow suspect I'm no longer on their side, what's to stop them from corrupting me again? Such thoughts will only lead to your ruin. Remember that your corrupted self was made from darker aspects of your personality. Those darker aspects should be able to deceive the other corrupted and the one who corrupted you. Keep that in mind and your mission will be successful. Right. Could I ask a favor, Vader? Yes. Allow me to convince my corrupted comrades to take the nun's sacred gear. It'll keep her alive long enough for them to extract it. In that time I can try and identify who corrupted them and I in the first place, as well as any other possible agents amongst the Kuo fallen. Very well, but on one condition. Condition. You will contact us the day before the extraction is to take place. We cannot take the chance that her death will restart the war. I think I can manage that. One other favor. Raynor asked as she stood from her chair, Issei's master gesturing for her to proceed. When I find the one who forced me to become like this, I want to be the one to kill them, in my own special way. Vader nodded once as he began to stand. Agreed. Now, go and carry out your orders. Issei saw the fallen angel grin fiercely, her heterochromatic eyes glinting, before she turned and left. Huotown outskirts Japan. Palawarna watched the stray exorcists with disinterest as they prepared for Argento's arrival. The stupid girl was 4 days late already, and her master's plans could only be pushed back so far. The girl was to be killed during the upcoming purge of devil contract requesters, led by that insane fucker, Fried Selzen. If anyone were to ask Palawarna about Selzen, she would have recommended he was a huge liability. Why her master let him live was a mystery to her. In her master's past, he usually disposed of men who were deemed far too unstable to be of use. Fried fit that description to a T. His mind stability was questionable at the very least. His loyalty was even worse, though. He had no loyalty to anything besides whoever let him kill without any restrictions or restraint. How long would it be until he realized he didn't need anyone to allow him to do that? She took comfort in the fact that her master's servant already had a plan in place to deal with Selzen, should he ever get out of hand. The servant, no one knew his true name, had the same powers as her master. That meant he was far stronger than she was, even though he was human. She would be annoyed by that if her master hadn't also been human. The power they both had access to trumped anything she might try and use against them. She'd learned that the hard way 16 years ago. When she'd first been brought into the fold by Kakabiel all those years ago, she'd mistakenly been loyal to Azazel. She'd tried to attack the 60-year-old human before her with a casual slash of a light spear she'd summoned. Imagine her surprise when the man dodged so fast she thought he disappeared. She saw him out of the corner of her eye before purple lightning engulfed her. Kakabiel himself was about to gut her when her master stopped him. The time between that moment and the end of that day was a blur, but she didn't care. Her life was much better being a subordinate to her master. The servant could use that same lightning ability, but the color of his was blue rather than purple. She didn't know what that meant exactly. In her spars with the servant, however, she found out that the lightning was just as potent as her master's was. That was also not mentioning the weapon the servant wielded. She'd read about a similar one in a strange report from some stray exorcist named Chiodini. Apparently, the weapon the servant and the being in the report used were stronger than light swords, able to slash bodies apart with ease. When she sparred with the servant, his black and red blade managed to block every hit from her spear. The blade also hurt a hell of a lot worse than getting stabbed with a spear. She remembered a particularly painful session in which she'd been stabbed through the gut with that blade. It burned for hours as her body healed itself, the burning sensation ending a day later. She was determined to never let that happen again. How go the preparations, Palawarna? A muffled voice asked from behind her, the voice itself sounding about as bored as she felt. Well, Millard. The strays are working slowly, but progress is steady, she answered, turning to the servant. The servant was a lean young man with fiery red and yellow eyes. His hair was a gray-black color, while his skin was as pale as fallen snow. The dark robe he wore did nothing to hide the metallic armor he wore underneath, nor did it hide the wicked cylinder he wore. If Palawarna remembered right, it was called a lightsaber. The saber the servant had was far different in design than the one she'd seen on her master. 4 equally incredibly sharp blades surrounded the lightsaber's emitter. Each held blood stains from times when the servant sated his more primal bloodlust. The design on the hilt was angular yet at the same time rounded. The pommel of the saber was a round knob capped with a spike. The spike was quite clean in comparison to the emitter blades. That isn't good enough. Our enemies are on the move. Vader's apprentice has already met with Gremory and Citri, and no doubt they've already met Vader himself. We must act quickly. Have them work faster. I must leave on a mission of my own. Apparently, some of our other members have started to doubt our master's vision. How long will you be away? Don't seek, middled, and I can only keep the other strays in the dark for so long, even with the strays loyal to our cause. At least a week. Our disaffected elements are in South America, after all. You know how dense the jungles are there. Yes. As for the other strays, they are ultimately only here to help fuel the fire for resuming the biblical faction war. As soon as the girl arrives, kill them. Dump their bodies near the park. As you wish. Oh, and before I forget, see if you can locate Raynor. We've lost contact with her. Of course. Have fun, Millard. Oh, I certainly will, the servant answered darkly as he walked out of the abandoned church's basement. Near Kuo Town, Japan. Sergeant VF 48106 20 seconds or Deaver to his friends, rubbed at a non-existent smudge on the small imperial crest he'd painted onto his helmet. It was in the center of the blue wedge on the helmet's forehead, which was itself flanked by a pair of stripes to either side. The two stripes ended just above his helmet's vocoder, like the main stripe underneath the small imperial crest. He'd spent the better part of the last hour performing an equipment check, as had the rest of Lieutenant Hornet's unit. This would be the first time any of them would be seen combat outside of simulations they had at their home's hodgepodge firing range. Those simulations were a great way to build unit cohesion and kept them sharp, but they weren't really a challenge. It was pretty easy to run through them since the targets are cardboard cutouts. Now they were to accompany Issei and the Kuo Academy Devils to take down a stray devil, whatever the hell that was. Thankfully they wouldn't need to venture into Kuo Town itself. The Devils reported their target was staying in an old industrial complex nearby to his and the other Imperial's home. That brought on its own set of issues in the former 1st Legion sergeant, but said issues were alleviated due to their mission objective. The objective of the mission was rather simple. Terminate the stray devil. Sounded simple enough to Deaver and his fellow stormtroopers. He put on the helmet and grabbed his primary weapon, the double-barreled E-22 blaster rifle, before slinging it onto his back via the rifle strap attached to its barrel and stock. He then stuffed his secondary, an SSK-7 heavy blaster pistol, into its holster on his right leg. The SSK-7 wasn't standard issue, but he couldn't part with it. It had saved his life from a pair of rebels on Sullust, and throwing it away seemed like a huge waste of a good pistol. As soon as he'd moved his hand away from the pistol, Hornet stepped into the room and called the men together. Deaver and the rest of the 10-man squadron formed a semicircle around their commanding officer, with the Stormtrooper sergeant standing in the front ring. The clone lieutenant glanced around and made sure everyone was there before speaking. We all know the general objective of this mission, so I'll skip over that part of the briefing. Our specific orders are to watch and learn how the Devils deal with a stray one of their kind. Commander Hyoudou will be joining us on the mission and is to be our mission lead. Knowing him though, he's going to shunt that responsibility off on me. The men chuckled at the jab towards Issei, Deaver included. In the Stormtrooper sergeant's opinion, he was a good kid, but he wasn't quite ready to be a leader. The kid wasn't all that well versed in overall strategy. Issei was one to improvise always unless given a plan created by Vader. If that were the case, he would act according to how Vader ordered in the plan. There was hope for him though. It would just take more field experience with Deaver, Hornet, and the rest of the squad before then. Alright, that's enough. We're to meet the Devils at the intersection. From there, they'll lead us to where the stray devil lives, and we'll act as backup as need be. Any questions? A hand went up. Sir, should we be concerned with discovery from any locals nearby? Negative, Corporal Miri, for all intents and purposes the complex the stray is living in is abandoned. Any other questions? Are there any locals close enough to the target site that'll get curious about the blaster fire? Another trooper asked, gesturing to his rifle for emphasis. I don't actually know, Bolt. From what the Devils told us, they usually lure civvies into their homes. People would notice if someone went missing if said home was close to Kuo Town, but I haven't seen or heard any missing persons reports from the police force. I'm guessing it's far enough that they'll be a non-issue. Does anyone else have a question? No one else raised their hand or spoke up. Hornet nodded once just before he ordered Deaver and the rest of the squad to form up behind him. As one, the squadron marched out of the barracks area and toward the entrance of their collective home. Kuo Town, outskirts Japan. Deaver had seen a lot in his time as a stormtrooper. It wasn't all that surprising, considering he'd been one of the first human recruits back during the Project War Mantle days. He'd spent over 36 years as a stormtrooper if one considered his current service under Vader. In all that time he'd never seen a group of people pop out of a giant red glowing circle on the ground. In all honesty, it wasn't really that shocking to him, but it was still surprising to learn teleportation was a thing. He was rarely shocked by anything anymore. He'd seen a lot in his years as a stormtrooper. From the Jedha invasion to the Star Destroyer incident on Raxus Prime to Alderaan's destruction, his shock threshold steadily went higher and higher until he was reasonably certain he couldn't be shocked anymore at this point. The Devils bowed in greeting as the circle faded away with Hyoudou doing the same. Deaver and his fellow troopers bowed with varying degrees of success, having never greeted someone by bowing before. Most of the galaxy used handshakes when greeting others rather than bowing. Handshaking was also common on Earth from what the Imperials knew of the planet, but it was one of many ways of greeting. Is this everyone? The red-haired devil asked as her eyes scanned Deaver and the other stormtroopers. Haim nodded before gesturing for Hornet to come forward. Eris Gremory, this is Lieutenant Hornet. He is the overall commander of the troopers behind me and is my second in command. Lieutenant Hornet, this is Eris Rias Gremory of the House of Gremory. She'll be leading the mission since she's got more experience dealing with stray devils. I trust that won't be a problem. Negative, sir, Hornet began as he held out a hand towards Rias, who took it immediately. Any specific orders for me and my guys, ma'am? I'd like you and your men to stay back and let us handle the stray. I'm sure you are all highly trained soldiers, but stray devils are extremely dangerous to humans. Watch how we deal with one and try to apply it to your own tactics the next time you face one, Rias explained as she turned and began to head toward the stray's lair. Deaver wasn't sure how the other troopers in their squadron felt most of the time, they were at that level of cohesion just yet, but he had an inkling they all felt the same at that moment. This teenage girl just casually dismissed members of the 501st. That was not something people did. He could forgive her just a little since she had no idea of their reputation, but to suggest a bunch of teens could do a better job than stormtroopers. That was insulting. Their op commander noticed his men's rising indignation immediately. Guys, try not to take what she said as an insult. She has no idea what you're all capable of yet. I'm sure she's right about stray devils. We haven't exactly fought one before, have we? We haven't, sir, but you can't say it's not insulting to be dismissed out of hand simply because we're human, Hornet replied calmly, used to such dismissals in his time as a member of the Stormtrooper Corps. The other clones in their unit grunted in agreement with their lieutenant. Haim acquiesced to Hornet's comment before turning to Deaver with an unspoken question. Deaver wasn't going to cause a problem over something so trivial, but it was still insulting to him. The stormtrooper sergeant nodded without speaking before the unit followed after the group of devils. It only took a few minutes until they too entered the stray's lair. The interior of the complex smelled like an abattoir that had been left to rot. Deaver's helmet MFTAS switched on his night vision, while also highlighting more vague shapes in the darkness. Pools of dark liquid appeared all across the floor, while more haphazard spatters and stains covered some of the walls. The stormtrooper sergeant didn't need to guess what the pools, spatters, and stains were. He'd seen them over the entire galaxy. It was blood. While we wait for our host to arrive, I'll explain the basics of a stray devil. This would have probably been better to do before we came here, but the Archduke marked the stray as a priority target, Rias explained as she faced the Imperials, while her fellow devils fanned out. The red-haired devil took a breath before she started her explanation. To begin, stray devils start out as reincarnated devil servants. They become strays when they kill or betray their masters, which are devil kings like myself. Sorry, ma'am, but devil king. Aren't kings usually male? One trooper, a fellow sergeant with a pair of blades painted on his helmet, asked. She seemed taken aback by his voice for just a second before answering politely. Deaver was sure it was because the other sergeant was a Fett clone, which meant he had the same voice as Hornet. For us devils, it's merely a title. Now, where was I? Oh yes. Stray devils usually kill their masters so that they can fulfill their own selfish desires. Without a master to regulate their powers, though, the former servants lose control of their powers and in turn, become twisted and warped by them. Fine, twisted and warped, another trooper said as she readjusted her hand around the grip of the DLT-19 she held. She then took one hand off of her weapon and fixed a bandolier across her chest plate. Their power completely overtakes their minds. This room is a good example of that. If you didn't realize it immediately, this is where she lures humans in for eating. This causes a problem for us because their wanton slaughter of humans is completely barbaric and could expose the rest of the supernatural world to humanity. We can't have that happen. That is why all stray devils or creatures like them are to be killed on sight. President, it's here, Kaneko said shortly as she and the other devils readied themselves for combat. As she said that, Deaver saw a figure appear from out of the darkness ahead. The figure looked like a young woman, and with the body she had, one wouldn't be surprised if they'd found her in any one of the many unsavory brothels found throughout the galaxy. She didn't look diseased surprisingly. The woman was quite beautiful until Deaver realized she was a little too high up by about 10 meters. He still couldn't get a good look due to how dark the room was, but something told him he should get ready to start blasting stuff. What is that delectable smell? No, wait, it smells like fucking shit. Will it taste as sweet as honey? Or will it be as sour as spoiled milk? The woman questioned to herself. Rias glowered at the new arrival with barely hid disgust before speaking. Stray devil visor. You killed your master, have allowed yourself to be corrupted by your desires, and have lured and eaten humans here. For these crimes, you have been sentenced to death by order of the Duke of Gremory. Would you like to be given an easy death or would you rather prefer to die in agony? How about a third option? I paint the room crimson with you and your peerage's blood, you little slut shitston, and eat the human buffet you kindly brought me after." The woman snarked back as she stepped closer. Deaver felt sick to his stomach as soon as the woman's lower body came into view. The woman's lower half, at least from the hips down, resembled an earth lion's body. The front legs of the body were not legs at all. They were instead massive arms that ended in clawed hands. The lower half's rear portion was more lion-like apart from the snake tail. Finally, a massive slit, almost like a mouth, ran vertically from the lower half's navel to just before the two massive arms. So that was what Gremory meant by twisted and warped. The spear began to form in the stray devil's offhand, and in return, Deaver and his fellow stormtroopers snapped their rifles to their shoulders. Glowing red circles appeared on the barrels of each blaster rifle and distracted the stormtroopers, while Visor finished summoning her spear. "Now that your guns are taken care of, time to begin the bloodbath," the stray shouted as she lifted her spear up and into the proper position for throwing. She never got a chance to throw it though. "Tibba," the Gremory heiress called, and the blonde boy responded. He began pulling a sword out of a sheath that Deaver hadn't noticed before and seemed to vanish. "Not to worry, he didn't disappear. He's merely moving fast. Kibba is the one knight of my peerage. The attribute of the knight is speed if that wasn't obvious." Tibba stopped for a moment before slicing off one of Visor's arms in a single blow. He tried getting them both, but from the flash Deaver had seen, the stray devil had blocked the strike enough to save her spear-wielding arm. Kibba jumped back as the white-haired devil, Kaneko if Deaver remembered right, brazenly walked forward. Deaver was about to let loose a few shots on the stray before Hyoudou held up a hand. The spear lunged for Kaneko, but the girl merely caught it and tossed it aside. She then sent an uppercut into the stray's face. The blow knocked it back a step before Kaneko was grabbed by one massive arm. The troopers readied their rifles again only to look on in shock as the small girl broke the massive hand's fingers from the inside. She then hopped away as Rhea spoke again, this time highlighting that Kaneko was her rook and that their attribute was simply overwhelming strength. She then called the black-haired devil, Akeno, forward for her turn. As Akeno walked forward, Deaver caught movement out of the corner of his eye. He turned to look and saw the severed hand leap up and pounce at the Gremory heiress. "Gremory, get down," the stormtrooper sergeant called as he raised the E-22 and pulled the red-haired girl away from the oncoming hand. The Gremory heiress landed with a grunt as she was deposited on the floor. With her out of the way, Deaver turned back to the threat. The stormtrooper sergeant exhaled as he acquired the hand in his blaster sights and depressed the trigger. A stream of blaster bolts shot out of both barrels, the top barrel shooting just before the bottom one. The burst hit the palm of the hand dead center and blew it apart. Viscera hit anything nearby, some even managing to land just shy of Rhea's, though most landed on the stormtrooper sergeant. She looked down at the mess of flesh and bone that had originally been the stray's arm before looking back at Deaver. "Thanks," Rhea said, stunned at the power the weapon had demonstrated. There was something else there too, almost confusion. Deaver nodded as he placed the rifle barrel on his shoulder. Both of the barrels were smoking, and he couldn't help but grin underneath his helmet. He'd always wanted to save a girl with a move like that. He watched as Rhea dusted herself off and glared at the downed stray. "Akeno, finish the bitch off." That was an unexpected phrase, coming from her, but then again none of the troopers or Hyoudou were surprised. Anyone would be angry if they were nearly sneak attacked. The smile on Akeno's face, however, was concerning to the Imperials, as was what she said next. "The naughty girl who tried to hurt our beloved president like you deserves to be punished," the black-haired devil said, almost giggling, before letting a torrent of yellow lightning loose on the stray. Rhea smirked as she watched Akeno before speaking to the Imperials again. "Akeno is my queen, or in other words, my second in command. She has the attributes of all other peerage members. She mainly uses attacks with demonic magic attached to them, plus she's a total sadist." As the Gremory heiress finished her explanation, the queen began laughing sadistically, a blush appearing on her face. The squadron of stormtroopers noticeably took a step back and all shared a concerned look underneath their helmets. After another minute or two, the stray looked like a scorched piece of meat. "I think she's done Akeno. Aw, and I was really starting to get into it." The black-haired devil walked back to the Imperials while Rhea's approached the downed stray. A red and black ball began to form in her right hand as she stopped just before Visor. "Any final words before I end you?" Rhea's questioned lazily while raising the red and black ball. "Just one. Die." The stray devil shouted as both of her massive arms shot out towards the Gremory heiress. They never reached her though. The spinning lightsaber blade soared through the air and spun directly through both arms. The stray screamed in pain as the stormtrooper squadron rushed forward and poured fire directly into it. Blaster fire lit up the room and echoed throughout it, making the devils cover their enhanced ears. The fire ceased 5 minutes later as the blasters overheated and stopped to cool. The body was barely recognizable now, and when Deaver turned to look at Hyoudou and the devils, he noticed they were all covering their ears. He wasn't surprised. Blasters were damn loud without their helmets on. Little bit of warning would be nice next time, Riaz muttered as she rubbed one ear while summoning the ball again. The Imperial stood back as she glanced down at the now barely living visor. Checkmate. The stray disappeared into dust before that too vanished. The arm from earlier dissolved into goo as soon as visor was dead, and the devils turned to regard the stormtroopers and Haim. You, with a 3-lined helmet, what is your name? Riaz asked as she pointed at Deaver. DF 48,106 20 seconds, ma'am, Deaver said immediately, coming to attention. Riaz shook her head with a smile before looking back up at him. Thanks again for what you did. You didn't need to go out of your way to shoot that arm for me. Think nothing of it, ma'am. Simply doing what I or the other guys in the squad would do for a teammate, even if you aren't on the squad. Still, you have my gratitude. How would you like me to repay it? A simple request. Don't treat us like we're just human. We're stormtroopers, ma'am. Not only that, we're the 501st. That means we're the best of the best of the best. All I want is equal participation in these ops. Does that work for you? That's completely fine with me. VF 48,106 20 seconds. Is there a shorter name I can use? Your name is a bit of a mouthful. Just call me 22. We're not the real name status just yet. Guotown Park, Japan. Raynor leisurely walked back to the abandoned church she and the other fallen called home. Her human disguise still worked flawlessly as she passed through the milling groups of Kuo citizens in the park. Why there were so many at this hour was strange, considering it was a school night. Sunday was still a couple of days off. Her thoughts wandered on her journey back for only one reason, thinking about the traitor who'd corrupted her caused her to become so angry that her magic didn't function properly. It was a strange new quirk she'd noticed after being uncorrupted. Whatever the corruption did also corrupted her powers to an extent. Whenever she became enraged, her powers became stronger but had the distinct downside of being unstable. She'd found that out the hard way in a training session Vader had put her through after she'd woken up. It also didn't help that every now and then she'd get strange twinges or feelings. They weren't necessarily bad, but they were weird all the same. The feelings and twinges seemed almost prophetic in nature. The first time she'd felt them had been during the training session when she'd been pitted against a pair of robots. Vader had called them commando droids. During her fight with the droids, she'd somehow known where strikes were going to land before they even happened. It didn't help when halfway through the prophetic twinges stopped. She'd taken a number of hits after the twinges stopped. That was when she'd noticed something kind of creepy. During the whole fight, Vader had never said a word, and he seemed to be focusing more on her after the twinges had occurred. The only sound she'd heard from the man was the mechanical breathing. She wasn't sure she'd ever get used to that noise. Raynor was snatched out of her thoughts when she heard a yelp a few feet from her. She looked over and spotted a young woman in a dark teal nun's uniform with light blue accents. Next to her was an open suitcase, which must have opened on impact with the ground. She was muttering in Italian as she sat up. The young woman had long blonde hair, half of which was covered by her wimple, and brilliant green eyes. She had the aura of someone who needed to be protected at all costs. All in all, the girl was quite adorable. That didn't detract from the power Raynor sensed from the girl. When she looked at the girl again, she seemed familiar. Her memory clicked into place as soon as she recognized what the power was. Twilight healing and more specifically, the connection between that sacred gear and the girl's overall appearance. Raynor had just stumbled onto Asia Argento. As soon as she realized that, she walked over to the still-sitting Asia. Hey, are you okay? Raynor asked as she held a hand out to her. The Argento girl smiled as she took the offered hand. Oh me? Si, sto bene, I mean yes, I am fine. Sorry, my Japanese is not good. That's alright. I can speak Italian if that would be easier for you. Brazy signorina, Argento started before waiting for Raynor to finish. Raynor smiled as she answered in Asia's native tongue. Yuma Mano. And you are? My name is Asia Argento, Miss Amano. Do you think you could help me? I'm kind of lost. Of course. I'm assuming you want to go to the church. Why yes, how did you know? The outfit was telling, and there is really only one church in this town. I'd be careful going there if I were you. All sorts of nasty people live there now. I'm sure I'll be fine. Now which way is the church? I'll show you the way. Follow me, Raynor said, turning to hide the scowl that formed on her face. So much for trying to warn the girl. The scowl went away when she realized that this would be the perfect excuse to come back to the church. Spin some story about trying to find the Argento girl after killing Haim, wait until the day before she's meant to die to contact Vader, then kill her corruptor. What could go wrong? Nikki Haim was just setting down the last plate of food when she heard the front door open. She carefully slid a hand down to the concealed blaster she'd been given by one of the Imperials back when she, Guru, and Issei had followed Vader. It had been a way to alleviate the fears she still had of a repetition of that night's events. Finding out that there were beings other than humans and animals on Earth that were after her and her family scared her to no end. Guru was sitting at the table and hadn't noticed the sound as he was too engrossed in his reading. It was the newspaper he'd missed this morning because of some emergency at work. He lowered the paper slightly, indicating he'd heard the door open. "It's alright, Mickey, it's only Issei," her husband told her calmly. It wasn't that she didn't believe Goro, but she couldn't tell from here. How he could was a mystery to her. The footsteps approaching them stopped just before entering the kitchen before Mickey got her confirmation. Issei's voice called out to her from beyond the living room entrance. "Mom, it's okay, it's only me. You can stop reaching for the blaster. I'm sorry you too. I wish I could grow out of my fear, but after what Vader told us all those years ago," she said sadly as she removed her hand from the blaster's grip. "Mom, you don't have to worry. Vader's teachings have taught me a lot. I can fight almost as well as he can now, and I can tell where, when, and how I could be in danger before it even happens. That is great and all, don't get me wrong Issei, but we're your parents. We'll always be worried about you," Goro said as he fully put down the paper. "I know. I'd be lying if I didn't feel the same. The problem is, I can't simply hide away. Palpatine is already on the move, and I'm the only one who can help Vader when the time comes, at least for now." "What do you mean by that?" both parents asked, Goro's hand stopping from trying to take a pair of chopsticks and Mickey halting herself from taking a seat at the table. "We've recently made some new allies, plus we learned why the Grigori are after me. First off, the allies we've made are similar to the Grigori. Don't start worrying about them though. They're firmly on our side, since they're already at war, technically, with the Grigori. Secondly, the Grigori are after me because they've been mind-controlled to do so. Palpatine's done something to them that basically makes them his slaves. Vader and I are calling it corruption." "How similar are these allies to the Grigori?" Goro asked, his gaze focusing solely on Issei. "Similar abilities as far as I can tell. Vader would probably be a better judge of that kind of stuff. Anyway, let's talk about this stuff later, alright? I'm starving." "Alright, Issei, but we are going to talk about this later. We agreed to no secrets in this family anymore." "I know, Dad." Mickey watched her son lower his hood before sitting down and grabbing herself a pair of chopsticks. Issei sat down and took a couple himself before they all began to eat. They ate in silence for a short time until Goro talked about his day at work. It helped remind Mickey that despite everything, they still had relatively normal lives. Issei's weren't normal by any means, but there was at least a modicum of normalcy there. She often found herself wishing that the prophecy about their son was someone else's problem. He was the only living child she'd been able to create with Goro after multiple tries. If he only lived because he was supposed to fulfill the prophecy, then what kind of existence was that? It wasn't fair to her or her husband. It was selfish, she knew that, but still, it was her son whose life was on the line. That prophecy had already made him a target too. That bastard Palpatine was determined to kill her son so he could do as he wished. He nearly succeeded once almost a decade ago. What's to stop it from being successful now? Sure, she could agree that the training did help even the odds, but when would it be enough? Mickey was sure she would never know for sure. So, in the end, as was often the case when she had these thoughts, she pushed them aside. She couldn't allow her son to become distracted by her. So she smiled and kept her thoughts to herself, just as she knew her husband did. With dinner done, Issei told her and Goro the latest news in his other life. That was what she referred to his life as Vader's apprentice. She and Goro weren't that much involved in it, truth be told, but their presence was felt all the same. They'd made genuine friends with a good number of Imperials. When Mickey and Goro had a problem, the Imperials were always there to at least try and help. She didn't always appreciate it, but at the same time, she welcomed the help. For example, she and Goro were taught how to wield blasters by some of the Stormtroopers. That was bound to come in handy someday, they both knew. The news wasn't all good. The agreement made between Vader and the other beings, called devils, which had its own negative connotations, had him fighting a monster on the outskirts of Kuo. Yet another creature to add to the list of worries. The financing from Grimory Large Enterprises and the Shitori Medical Group was a nice addition. Hopefully, they could access a little portion of that money. It would be nice to pay off the mortgage sooner rather than later when she and Goro were in their 60s. It was time for the adults to go to bed after an hour of talking had passed. They both had an early date tomorrow. It was going to be a fun day for them. Mickey could hardly wait. Day 4 of Issei's mission, Kuo Academy, Japan. Issei suppressed a yawn as the teacher went on and on about the book they were assigned to read. The young apprentice wasn't sure he'd be able to read given his more important life after school. With the alliance between his master and the devil heiresses, things were bound to become far more interesting, to say the very least. After a moment or two, he found his gaze wandering towards the window nearby. He allowed his mind to roam as he looked outside. He thought about last night's fight and the frequent sense of being watched by that other presence within him. He wished the damn thing would quit hiding and reveal itself already so he could focus on more important matters. Being watched tended to make individuals sloppy, and while the Force helped with that issue, it didn't totally counter it. The watched feeling had made his training difficult at times. That was, of course, only when it was at its strongest. MDM. Mr. Hyōdō. The teacher's voice called from right beside him. With a jolt, Issei was brought out of his thoughts as he faced his annoyed teacher. Yes, Mr. Wakao. Your name was called on the intercom by Miss Shitori. You had best start heading to the student council room. You don't want to make her angry. Considering the time, no need to head back once she's done. Class is nearly over now. Of course, Mr. Wakao, Issei replied as he stood up from the desk, using the force to keep his lightsaber in place as he stood up. Wakao moved back to let the apprentice out. Issei gathered his things and then walked out of the classroom. He wondered what the Citri heiress wanted with him as he strolled to the student council room. He caught sight of Ria's on the way there, but decided against bugging her. She seemed to be concentrating on something as she walked. He took this time to study her. Before, he had been focused solely on her background and hadn't really thought about her beyond that. Now he realized that she was quite beautiful. He already knew that due to her title as one of the two great ladies of Kuo, but he could now fully agree with the title. There was also the mystery surrounding her that had its own allure. Granted, he knew a good chunk more about her than most people did, but at the same time, he was just as in the dark as they were. Now that he thought about it, he knew that part of that mystery was born from what she did at the old school building near the back of the school's campus. He guessed that it was a base of operations for her and her peerage. Other than that though, he had no idea what they did. Perhaps the meeting in the student council room would shine some light on that particular issue. Riaz entered the student council room ahead of him as he lowered his hood. The room was slightly brighter compared to the last time he'd been inside. There were also more members of Sona's peerage inside who were busy dealing with paperwork. They looked up as he came in, caution evident on their faces. He couldn't blame them for that. The alliance between the Imperials and the Devils was a day old, plus, the Imperials did kidnap two of their fellow peerage members yesterday. Hello Riaz, Mr. Hyōdō, Sona greeted politely from her seat at the student council table. Riaz smiled at her fellow heiress before sitting down at the table as well. Issei bowed in greeting. Good morning, heiress Citri, or should I address you as Miss Shitori? I would prefer Shitori while we're here at school. When outside the school and dealing with the supernatural, you may address me as Citri. I assume you've already got an idea as to why I called you? Something to do with the alliance? Yes. Particularly, Riaz and I wish for you to join the occult research club. I see. I assume this is to keep tabs on me? In part, yes, but this is mainly so that we can easily contact the other Imperials from here, rather than heading to their home. It is rather far outside Kuo town proper, and it would be suspicious if Riaz were seen there. That area is well known for its crime and poverty. We know. We've tried to fix the former issue to the best of our ability, but that is somewhat difficult as we can't exactly move around freely. Our equipment isn't exactly subtle. We all saw that quite well. There is, however, the grey armored troops Ria and Momo told us about. They would serve our needs quite well regarding secrecy if the stray is closer to Kuo than the last one you, your men, Riaz, and her peerage dealt with last night. I assume they have a name? Riaz cut in before Issei could answer. They call themselves Stormtroopers, at least the white and blue armored ones do. I'm assuming they're all called Stormtroopers, of course. You're half right, Miss Gremory. They are Stormtroopers, though they do fall under the classification of Shadow Troopers. We have several types of special forces, Shadow Troopers being one type, but our troops are mainly standard Stormtroopers. I'm sure we'll speak more about them later, Issei began before addressing Sona, and you would be correct that they would be a better unit to use in Kuo town. Their armor is outfitted with a cloaking generator, which makes them invisible to all spectrums. That's at least how I understand it, but I'm sure the troopers themselves would be better at explaining how it works. I'm sure they would. That, however, is a topic for when we actually properly meet with them. Do you have any problems with joining the org? I don't. What do I need to do to join? Simply fill out the club application form and report to the old school building after classes end today. Riaz will handle the rest from there. I look forward to seeing you in the clubroom, Mr. Hyōdō, Riaz said, an impish grin on her face. Issei chuckled before replying, since we talked about preferred titles earlier, I would prefer Issei to Mr. Hyōdō. Mr. Hyōdō is my dad. I'm simply Issei. Surveillance Outpost Omicron, Japan. Master Vesek Dre scowled as he read over the new information gathered from their asset in Kuo Academy. Not only had the blasted Hyōdō boy joined Gremory's little club, but there were other supernaturals at the academy as well. It had been bad enough when he found out about the devils. The new wave of supernaturals was only going to complicate the upcoming operation. Dre's and the men of Surveillance Outpost Omicron, which itself was a small part of Palpatine's Terran Empire, were tasked with monitoring and on occasion acquiring the supernatural in this section of Kuo town. They were all part of a growing force that would one day retake the galaxy and restore its rightful owner to power. Dre's and his fellow surviving cultists of the disciples of Mark Aragnos were promised important positions when that goal was achieved. At least, that was what he had been promised. He didn't really care what happened to his fellow cultists. Why should he? They were the reason they were now all stuck on this backwater planet. They never should have joined the Imperial Remnant. Those fools had been too sloppy and allowed Skywalker's GD Order and the New Republic to discover their efforts to resurrect their old deity. Now, Ragnos was gone for good and most of their cult was either dead or missing. All thanks to one damn GD named Kor. Draze was lucky in that he'd managed to escape Korriban before the GD could reach him. He and his band of survivors drifted for a time before they were compelled to head deep into the unknown regions by the Emperor, who was supposed to be dead. "Sir?" A voice asked from in front of him. Judging from the filtering, he guessed it was one of the new stormtroopers Palpatine had managed to create in the time he'd spent on Earth. The armor this stormtrooper wore was far more advanced than the sets Draze had seen. It was almost a mix of old clone trooper and normal stormtrooper armor. The armor looked far more flexible, however, and far sleeker when compared to normal stormtrooper armor. The helmet of the trooper had an enlarged visor that connected with the newly extended mouth line. Rather than the white of a normal stormtrooper, his armor was painted completely black with a dark red visor. This, coupled with a hint of dark side power emanating from the trooper that Draze felt, signified him as one of Palpatine's newest iteration of dark troopers. Draze glanced up from his datapad with an annoyed grimace. "I take it you've seen the new intel, Commander." The dark trooper commander, Draze couldn't remember his name, nodded. "Yes, sir. I'm not concerned. My men are perfectly capable of carrying out the operation. They had better be. The Emperor doesn't take kindly to failure, Commander," Draze stated bitterly, hiding his discomfort at the commander's monotone voice. It reminded him too much of the Death Troopers he'd had the displeasure of working with while the Ragnos cult aided the Imperial Remnant. "I know, which is why you should focus more on your own work back in Hyoudou rather than here. The corruption of the Yokai is a higher priority than this post. One of your followers should suffice if we are discovered, sir. Don't tell me my job. I'm only here to ensure the transfer goes smoothly, remember? As soon as that is done, I'll be out of your hair. You on the other hand, should perhaps start preparing for tonight." "Already done, sir." "Good. You are clear on your orders." "Yes, sir." "Snatch and grab the known supernaturals from the academy and bring them here for conversion. Key targets are Citri and Gremory. Any word on how we'll get them both, sir?" False orders from the Archduke calling for them both to destroy a stray devil near the industrial district. A new voice cut in, that of a younger man in a combat jumpsuit covered by a black robe. The black mask he wore hid his face, but the former cultist master knew the young man had an arrogant smile underneath it. "You're going on this mission. You've only just begun to learn your new force powers," Yaris Besek said, folding his arms as he looked at the youngest of his followers. "It's only a pair of devils." "Nothing I haven't dealt with before," Yaris countered as he began tossing his lightsaber and catching it. "Very well. If you fail, however, the consequences will be severe." "You're far too cautious, Draze. They have no defense against the Force. They don't always need one. I have more important matters to attend to, however, so try not to fuck up," Draze finished, using one of the earth curses he'd learned out of habit. Yaris nodded and looked like he was about to say something else when Draze turned and began toward the nearby elevator. As the Dark Trooper commander had mentioned and he had just said, the former Ragnos cultist master had more important business to deal with. He didn't want to anger Palpatine by wasting time here. As he left for Hyoudou, he got the distinct sense that the operation wouldn't go as planned. Guotown outskirts Japan. ET-491-001 readjusted his grip on one of the few original blasters the Terran Empire had as his squadron approached the abandoned church. The few members of the Empire Reborn that had survived both the destruction of Biss and the second death of Palpatine on Onderon. ET-491-001, born Ryuzo Juba, didn't know much about that period of history, seeing as he hadn't even known aliens existed until 5 years ago. Ryuzo had originally been a member of the Yakuza when he'd been approached. He'd gotten swept up in the promises of power and wealth made by the Emperor. He also welcomed the chance of being called a hero for helping Earth become the dominant power in the galaxy. This was contingent, of course, on the Emperor taking control of Earth. What Ryuzo and many like him didn't know was that they'd been brainwashed by the Emperor. The Emperor used a mixture of his own silver tongue, dark side corruption, and dominate mind abilities. This allowed him to gather followers from even the supernatural races of Earth. At this point, many were too enthralled to ever be brought back from the Emperor's control. Ryuzo stopped as his squad leader, Captain Daigo, raised a gloved fist. Ryuzo and another trooper, DT-491-002, were the only dark troopers in this particular squadron. The others looked like members of any modern military on Earth, though in this case, they drew heavily on the look of the Japanese ground self-defense force. Most of their unit carried Type 89 or Type 64 rifles, 3 carried the JGSDF's main submachine gun, the Minebia 9mm machine pistol. All the weapons were magically enhanced, just in case this part of the operation went sideways somehow. Ryuzo doubted that would happen. Igo scanned the forest until a girl with twin tails and wearing a gothic Lolita outfit appeared from out of the trees. If Ryuzo remembered right, this was the fallen angel middled. She looked annoyed. The operation's tonight. Are you fucking kidding me? Raynor just got back with the Argento brat, she muttered as she walked toward Igo. Igo rolled her eyes before responding. About Argento, there's been a change of plans. The Emperor wants her brought to him. Something about her sacred gear being useful. So we don't get to kill her? No, you don't. Where is she? The loyalist stray exorcists have her in a sort of VIP room. Raynor and Donasik have been keeping an eye on her. Bring her here. You, Raynor, and Kalawarna are coming with us. Donasik, Selzin, and the strays loyal to us will distract the loyalists. Where are we taking her? Omicron. Yeah, there first, and then we'll head for the Emperor. Have to bring our resident reborn with us too, and he's working on the devil operation. Right. Be back soon, Middle said as she headed back to the church. Ryuzo watched her go and out of boredom, wondered how the devil operation was going. Little did he know it would not go smoothly. Guo Town Industrial District, Japan. Sona Citri frowned as she stood before the dilapidated warehouse. There was something about the new orders from the Archduke tonight that felt off. For a stray devil to require both her peerage and Ria's, it must have originally been a rook or perhaps a bishop reincarnated. That didn't make sense, however. Rooks, bishops, and the like were usually destroyed before they could escape. This is because they have had longer to adjust to being a servant. Pawns and the like are fresher and are far more comfortable on the surface. The red transport circle appeared near the entrance. Ria's and her peerage came out of the circle. Ria's took no time in locating her, since she, Tsubaki, and her own rook, Tsubasa Yura, were standing in front of the warehouse's main doors. She raised an eyebrow at Ria's as she and her peerage approached. Before you ask, Issei is coming. Not sure when he'll get here, though, so in the meantime, we could come up with plans to take the stray down, Ria's offered as she gazed around the warehouse's surroundings. Yes, though I do want to talk about that. Don't you find it odd that we're both being sent to take care of a single stray? I'd understand if it was multiple strays working together. The order didn't mention anything about there being more than one stray, Sona said as she cupped her chin and thought. Maybe it's a stray bishop or rook. They make it here sometimes, you know. That's another thing that's bothering me. They didn't say what kind of stray that it was. True. Something wrong? Issei's voice cut in, startling Sona, while Ria's glared at him in slight annoyance. You realize that trick was only going to work on me once, right? Yes. Apologies for startling you, Arasitri. I forgot you aren't used to force powers yet. Not to worry, though, Ria's had a similar reaction, as did Akeno and Kiba. How? I enhanced my speed with the force. One of the many abilities the force grants me. I see. I also noticed you called Ria's by her actual name. I'm guessing she was getting a little tired of being called Aris Gremory all the time. Oh yes. Didn't even let him step foot in the club room before telling him to call me Ria's instead of my title. I would ask that you do the same for me then, Issei. Practically speaking, it's faster to say my name rather than my title. Anyway, back to your previous question, I have concerns about this stray hunt. What kind of concerns? Sona never got the chance to answer. She tensed when she heard something click from inside the warehouse. She wasn't the only one. Ria's and her peerage had heard it too. Issei was confused for only a second before his expression grew tense and he unholstered his weapon. Well now, a voice called from behind them, I suppose devils having enhanced senses was true. Not that they'll do you any good. Sona, Ria's, and Issei turned toward the voice simultaneously. Standing on the other side of the entrance, a hooded man in a combination of black robes and metallic armor stood alone. His face was covered by a mask with red markings, but what really caught Sona's eye was the metal cylinder hanging on the man's belt. This will be much easier on all of you if you surrender. There is no point in resisting. You are already surrounded by my men, the hooded man said as he gestured to armored beings that appeared from out of the darkness. Sona glared as she began summoning some of her water magic. Who are you? It's obvious you aren't from Lord Vader's forces. Now why would I tell you that? Take them. The hooded man called as the cylinder belted at his side flew up and into his palm. The cylinder ignited with a snap hiss and an orange-red blade lit up the night as he sprung towards her. Issei's cylinder did the same, though it ignited in a lighter quiz color. Issei quickly engaged the hooded man before he could reach their group. The other armored men, on the other hand, were free to approach. 3 of them held rifles, while the others were holding what looked like batons and shields. Kiba unsheathed his sword and held it in a ready stance as Kaneko took a boxer's stance. Tsubasa backed them up while Akeno, who'd used her magic to change into her priestess outfit, and Ria stood alongside Sona. Tsubaki had taken a position in front of her king as a shield. Sona, in the meantime, studied the people approaching. They weren't from Vader's forces, but their armor was certainly similar to the stormtroopers she'd seen in their home. Sleeker, maybe, and more flexible, it still held an eerie similarity to the other stormtroopers. Coupling that with the all-black color scheme with a red visor would make an intimidating display if she wasn't already used to far more terrifying visages. One armored soldier with a rifle, which looked almost the same as the blasters Vader's men used, and a black pauldron, was chivying the other men to hurry and close with them. The other two rifle-wielding men fired blue rings at her and Rias. Tsubaki took one head-on and staggered as one of the armored men reached her. The man swung his baton at her, the end of said baton crackling with bluish-white electricity, only to be hit with a blow from Sona's magic. She hadn't seen where the other blue ring, most likely a stun blast, had gone. The other baton-wielding man attacked as the pauldron-wearing soldier aimed his own rifle at her. He fired 2 shots in rapid succession, one at her and one at Rias. Akeno didn't have time to defend her own king as she was rushed by 2 of the baton wielders. Tsubaki took the second blast and collapsed while the third hit Rias. She jerked from the impact as Sona shot at the man with a blast of water. The blast sent the man backward and into a wall behind him with enough force to dent the cracked. He seemed to collect himself and tried to walk forward only to fall on his face a couple of steps in. She didn't see much after as she too was rushed by baton-wielding troops. She read the minds of the closest 2 and dodged their swings before Akeno and a groggy Tsubaki took them down. The third man struck Tsubaki in the back of the head with his baton and knocked her out before stepping over her and coming into range of Sona and Rias. "Sona, down." Sona's rook called from behind her. The Citri heiress ducked as the rook's fist came flying toward the baton wielder. The fist connected with the helmet and the helmet grew visible cracks from the hit. The man fell backward as a trickle of blood started to leak from the helmet. "Enough games. We only need the heiresses, kill the rest." The hooded man called in a strained voice, just barely audible over the sound of his and Issei's duel. "For the Emperor." One of the men called as he snatched a strange gun from the holster that had been built into his armor. The weapon barked and shell casings flew out, but rather than bullets, energy bolts shot toward a rook. Sona put up a barrier just in time to stop the projectiles and began trying to disable the gun with magic. It didn't work. The other soldiers pulled out similar weapons and began firing on the others, hemming them in as they all put up barriers. "They can't keep this up forever. Pour it on." A man in armor said, this one being one of the original rifle holders. Rias inched closer to Sona and whispered as she began summoning her power of destruction into a ball. "When I give the signal, lower the barrier, Sona." Sona nodded and waited for said signal. Issei grunted as one of the hooded man's fists clipped the side of his jaw. He swung his saber at the man to keep him from trying to attack while Issei was off balance. The man easily blocked the strike and swung at Issei again. The apprentice was forced backward by the ferocity of the strike. He saw the man swing for his legs and quickly blocked the strike. "I have to admit, I'm surprised to find a GD here on this backwater," the man began casually. "I figure your kind would be busy on Yavin 4 with Skywalker and Kattern. Then again, you do not feel like them." "I am no GD," Issei ground out through strained teeth as he struggled to keep his opponent's blade in place. "Really? You're clearly not one of us, yet something about you feels familiar. Who was your master? Now why would I tell you that? You're learning already. Good. Here's another lesson." The man shouted as he suddenly pulled his saber back and went for a slash at Issei's head. The apprentice ducked back from the slash but fell for the feint and got a kick to the gut in response. His lightsaber fell from his grasp as he went to clutch at his newest injury from the fight. The weapon shut itself off, and before he could catch it, it was flung toward the surrounded devils. The man stabbed his saber tip at the apprentice's chest and only missing by centimeters. Issei couldn't risk calling his lightsaber back to himself with his opponent so close, so he retreated toward the warehouse. It was to no avail as his assailant advanced as the apprentice retreated. "Damn it, he's too fast. Think, Issei, think." The apprentice thought as he glanced around for anything he could use to toss at the man. He spotted a pile of boxes and quickly used the force to fling them at the man. The man grinned evilly as he swept his blade through the crates. "Cute, but it won't save you." Issei swore as he threw more crates only for the man to destroy those too. As the apprentice kept moving back, he failed to notice the body of one of the unknown troopers. He tripped over one of the trooper's errant arms and landed on his back. The man's pace never changed as he advanced on Issei, nor did his evil grin. "Well, I can safely say this was fun, but as I told my men earlier, we only really need the heiresses. Last I checked, you aren't one of them," the man commented darkly as he slowly raised his saber above his head for an overarching slash. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as the man brought the blade down. Issei closed his eyes, unwilling to watch the blade cut into him. "I'm sorry everyone. I pray that you can continue the fight without me. Love you, Mom and Dad. I'm sorry I won't be able to make it home." "What kind of talk is that, partner?" Issei's eyes shot open at the voice before he winced as pain lanced through his left arm. A bright emerald light began to emanate from an orb in the middle of his hand before his forearm became covered in a red gauntlet. The orb appeared in the same spot that it had been on his hand, and 10 golden spikes manifested onto the gauntlet as well. Issei had been distracted by the sudden appearance of the gauntlet that he'd forgotten about the blade coming down on him. Out of instinct, Issei held his left forearm above his head to attempt to stop the blade. He knew it was a pointless gesture, but he couldn't help himself. He was shocked when he saw the blade bounce off the gauntlet as if it was a lightsaber as well. What? How is that a sacred gear? Damn it, focus fire on the GD, troopers. The man snarled as he leaped backward. Ria's voice cried out as the troopers closest to her spun to shoot at Issei. Now Sona. The barrier that Sona had put up to protect herself dropped and a familiar magic ball shot out toward 2 of the troopers. They never stood a chance as they were disintegrated. The troopers already aiming at Issei turned to take care of the new threat but were far too slow. Kiba rushed out with his own blade and snatched Issei's lightsaber and flicked it on. 3 more troopers died from Kiba's attack while the final 2 raised their weapons at the Gremory Knight only to meet a fist from the Gremory and Citri Rooks each. Issei, catch. Kiba called as he deactivated the saber and tossed it toward the apprentice. The man snarled and went to throw the coming lightsaber further away only for Issei to charge him. The man tried to attack but again got his lightsaber blocked by the gauntlet. Issei then grabbed the man by his robes and drove his head into the man's mask. The man hissed in pain before Issei switched the man's saber off and knocked it out of his hands. The man roared in anger as he lunged at Issei, his mask cracked and a part of his face showing through. He wrapped his hands around Issei's throat, choking the apprentice. Just die already. The man shouted as Issei felt his vision darken. He wouldn't survive being bisected just to be choked to death. He called his lightsaber, which had landed on the ground closer to him and the man, to his hand and quickly jammed it against the man's gut. Issei ignited the lightsaber. The blade extended out of the man's back, the man too stunned to make a sound. He grunted as Issei deactivated the blade again, allowing the man to fall. The apprentice coughed as the man collapsed to his knees while holding the still burning hole where the lightsaber's blade had gone through. How? How was I killed by a bunch of teens? The man asked with his final breath, falling onto his side. Issei looked at the dead man and then at the lightsaber. Vader had taught him how to kill, but before now he'd never actually killed another living person. One might argue the stray from last night counted, but then again, he'd never actually killed it, had he? All he did was cut its arms off. The apprentice wasn't sure how he felt as he stared at the corpse before him. That's enough of that, partner. It was him or you. Don't think of it beyond that. Who are you? Issei asked in his mind as he tore his eyes away from the body. All in due time, partner, but for now, focus on the devils. They're probably scared and confused after that fight. Issei nodded to himself as he turned to face the haggard devils. He noticed that Kiba, Tsubasa, Tsubaki, Kaneko, and even Ria's had injuries. Out of all of them, Tsubaki was the most injured. He could see blood dripping from the back of her head as she was supported by Sona and Akeno. He probably didn't look much better. He also saw that they were all focused on the gauntlet on his arm rather than him specifically. Ria stared at the boosted gear on Issei. To think it would manifest so soon after the last user had died and in its second state already was unprecedented. From what she and Sona knew, the awakening of this particular sacred gear between users was at the very least 50 years. That was also not considering who it was attached to. Of all people, it had to be the one aligned with the newest faction. Ria's had no doubt that Vader and his men would become a new faction in the supernatural. They were simply that powerful. The sacred gear also helped answer why Issei was targeted by the Fallen originally. The boosted gear was a very powerful sacred gear, being one of the 13 Longinus. The Fallen would never allow such a gear in the hands of an untrained child. Had he the chance, Azazel would have likely taken Issei under his wing to train him in using the gear. Others would have killed him to prevent the other factions or Fallen leaders from getting their hands on Issei. That didn't answer, however, how the Fallen that had tried having Issei assassinated knew that Issei had the gear in the first place. Does anyone know what this thing is, or are you all going to keep staring at it? Issei asked dryly, glancing around just in case more unknown people showed up. Sona cleared her throat before speaking. That, Issei, is the sacred gear known as boosted gear. It is a supernatural artifact from the Great War of the Three Factions. The soul of the Welsh dragon resides in it. There's more history to it, but we have more pressing matters to deal with. Namely, whatever is inside the warehouse. Agreed, Ria's interjected as she turned to the warehouse. Be on guard, everyone. There could be more of these people inside. Before we head in, someone should keep an eye on our new prisoners, Issei mentioned, gesturing at the few unconscious soldiers. Sona nodded and turned to the 2 rooks and knight of the group. Right. Tsubasa, Kaneko, and Kiba. Watch them. The rest of us will investigate. The 3 agreed and each went to a soldier. Issei reached for something in his school uniform and pulled out a small black device. After talking into it for about a minute, he put the device back and turned back to the warehouse. Letting my master know about the attack. He's sending a squadron of shadow troopers to police the bodies. Good. Let's head inside before anything else happens, Ria stated as she and Akeno began walking briskly toward the warehouse. She went to open the door, only to find it locked. She narrowed her eyes and went to force it open when Issei approached out of the corner of her eye. "Stand back," he said as he once again ignited the lightsaber. With a quick sweep downward, he cut the obvious lock off the door. The door started to swing inward, revealing an empty warehouse. Ria's narrowed her eyes further as she stepped inside and looked around. It seemed like a normal warehouse from what she could see. That was when she noticed a strange flicker near the back of the warehouse. She led the others towards it, making sure to watch her surroundings. She instantly put up a barrier as a red bolt shot out of the rapidly flickering back wall. Issei blocked the shot and with a grunt, a body fell out of the now dissolving hologram that had been a fake back wall. The person, it looked like a woman, writhed as she grasped at her injured arm. Another bolt was fired at them, and Akeno sent a blast of thunder magic at the user. The second person, a man wearing a black jumpsuit and similar helmet to the men outside, spasmed from the magic and dropped to the ground. "Secure them," Issei commanded as he continued forward with his lightsaber held out in one hand. He was obviously waiting for another shot to come, but it never did. Rias and the others didn't question him as the woman was enthralled in a mind control spell by Sona, while Tsubaki and Akeno watched over the man the Thunder Priestess had knocked out. Rias glanced around the new back area of the warehouse, seeing nothing out of the ordinary again. What the hell were those two guarding? I'm not sure. Their outfits are similar to the ones our pilots wear, but I don't see a ship, Issei replied as he shut off his weapon once more. Look around. See if there are any clues on what it is they were guarding. Right. Rias and Issei searched the shelves lining the walls, hoping to find some kind of trace or sign of whatever was inside the warehouse. The crimson-haired ruined princess grimaced as nothing seemed to look out of the ordinary. As she turned to look at Issei, she saw that same flicker again. It was smaller this time, however, and focused on something in the middle of the room. "Issei, did you see that?" "Yeah. Let me try something," Issei said as he started walking toward where the flicker had appeared. He never did get to try anything. As soon as he had started moving, the flicker happened again and seemed to become more frequent. The flicker ended abruptly as a large spaceship came into view. The ship was unfamiliar to Rias, and from the look on Issei's face, he didn't recognize it either. The ship was small enough to fit in the warehouse, but only just. The top wing had enough space to fit an average person between it and the roof. The other two wings, one on each side of the ship, stood a meter off the ground, held aloft by three mechanical legs. All three wings were equally spaced apart from the triangular center, which held the cockpit. The cockpit itself was elongated and ended just a few centimeters of the three wings. The part of the cockpit facing Issei and her reminded Rias of an eye. She leaned to her left and noticed the ship was far longer than she thought, with a large space that had a single open door on its side. There was a ramp touching the floor which led up to the door. "Who exactly are we up against?" she asked quietly as she stared at the ship. Issei turned to face her, a grim expression on his face. "It seems Palpatine has started making moves." End of the here. So that's it for today's video guys. Before you go, just like the video and share it with your friends. Bye.